Today on The Rare Advisor, we're going to have an in-depth look at strategic succession, including M&A. This is the part of financial advisory practice development that almost no one has properly taken care of. Stay tuned. Once again, welcome to The Rare Advisor. We discuss a business model that is supercharged by recurring and repeatable events. We break that apart into digestible units of information that you can put into work directly into your practice. If you like this sort of content, if you've enjoyed listening to us in the past, please like, subscribe, comment. That's what allows us to keep doing this for you over and over again. I have today, for your enjoyment, joining me is Steve Phillips. Steve and I have been working our way through the three phases that every practice finds itself in. It doesn't matter how long you've been in business or how new you are to this industry. You are in one or more of these three phases. That is acquisition, meaning client and asset acquisition, expansion, specifically meaning business scale and expansion. And now today we're going to focus in on succession, which specifically means strategic succession, transitions, as well as M&A. Steve, you've been leading the charge for us on this topic in terms of coaching and mentoring through our protocol program with all the independent advisors we work with across the country. I know this is a huge topic these days. You've helped a number of firms get the next generation ready to take over the reins at practices, and we've helped them legally and structurally with a lot of these succession issues. So this is a huge topic to cram into a short amount of time. But with that being said, I'll let you kind of set the stage the way you'd like for us to start this subject.
No, thanks, Mike. And I've been looking forward to this one. This is how I feel about, before I get into some of the numbers that we know are happening in the industry, is among the many things that USA does head and shoulders above the rest of the industry, I would say succession is maybe just in an orbit by itself. We both have so many relationships throughout the industry, and I think everybody knows it's topical, and there aren't resources and there aren't initiatives in place to help advisors realize this. I mentioned when we started the expansion phase that fully 90% of the advisors that we work with are in expansion. And we would agree that that makes sense when they think about creating efficiencies and scale and so forth. This is not over dramatized, though, either. That fully 100% of the advisors we talk to have succession on their mind somewhere. Now, it might be 10 or 12 years down the road. It might be happening now. It could be planned. It could be something that wasn't planned. But every advisor we talk to, and I said this too, I don't know if it's a generational thing. You and I have known each other for 30 years, have been in the industry for that long and a little bit longer. And it's a lot of the advisors that we've known for years or people that are kind of our age. So there is a generational thing. After 30 years, have we built it? What do we do with it now? And so, the topics that we touch on are, the number one thing is ensuring value that's bigger and outside just the relationship that clients have with their advisor. And I know that you have much to say on that. And and you've said this numerous times, it's not your job I want to buy, it's your practice I want to buy. And so if you are the sole instrument of value, then we've got a problem there. That goes beyond just your current clients. Retention of current clients, of course, but then what about second and third generation? How do they recognize the value? And then an overlooked part of succession is, what about staff and junior advisors? We find so many conversations we have where we'll mention that to advisors, like, oh my gosh, what's your staff going to do? Are they aware of the conversation? Are they participating in the conversation and all those things? So one of the amazing things that USA has done, really, again, I believe we're head and shoulders above everybody else in the industry, is to address all of those and have methods to walk advisors through any number of different ways that succession happens. So let me kick that back over to you and let you really start to run with that.
Sure. Well, as you point out, it's a huge topic, right? And it's like death and taxes. It's going to happen. It has to happen to you. That's why it's on everybody's mind, is because whether you're in the early stages of running your practice, whether you're in the middle stages or whether you're in the late stages, at one time or another, succession or transition is going to become an issue. And that can ramp itself forward as well. So if you're talking about an M&A deal, whether you're trying to grow through acquisition or maybe you're joining another firm, you're being acquired, that can change those timeframes rapidly as well. And so, yeah, it definitely affects everyone. And the other thing is that people, I think, always underestimate until it hits them square between the eyes is your clients, your customers, the consumer. This is a huge concern for them because they always have that question in the back of their mind. Some will verbalize. In fact, many are verbalizing it nowadays. But what happens to me if something happens to you first? And you have to have an answer for that because they're counting on you, right? When they get to the stage that they're not living off of their paycheck anymore, they're going to be living off the work you've done for them. They're going to be living off the assets and the accumulation and the plan that you have put in place. So you become an unbelievably important person in their life. And it is concerning to them that if something should happen to you, even if you're younger than your clients are, what happens if something unexpected happens, a car accident, whatever the case might be, you have to have an answer for that. If for nothing else, for the peace of mind for the customer to know that their plan and their business model for their own personal financial plan, business model, if you will, is protected. So I would throw the idea of having an emergency contingency plan into this equation as well. And that's something that even if you think you're a long ways away from succession, you need to have an emergency contingency plan in place ASAP if it's not already done. I would say, put an asterisk by that one. That needs to happen real quick and if you have a situation at hand, you can build one internally. So if you've got multiple advisors in the same practice, or you've got first generation, second generation in the same practice. And when I say generation, I'm not necessarily talking that there's a family connection there. There could be, but I'm just talking about older advisor, younger advisor. You can create some internal contingency plans if something should happen to one or more of you. You can also do that with outside firms. You could do that, with a group across the other side of town that maybe you guys have some strategic alignment, or maybe one day you're thinking that the two of you might actually join forces, or one will acquire the other. You could put a contingency succession plan, an emergency succession plan, as I usually call it, in place ahead of time. And then a lot of people tap into USA Financial for that. If you are in alignment with USA Financial, you're working with us, we'll put our money where our mouth is. We will actually step forward and we'll provide you with that emergency contingency plan. It's kind of like letting us be your backstop or your safety net or your insurance policy. Well, I say insurance policy, there's no premium involved. There's no cost to this. You just have to be in alignment with us. But a lot of advisors, they're very concerned about that because if you don't have someone there who you ultimately think is going to take over your practice, then this becomes a difficult conversation. And if it's a difficult conversation for you, imagine how your customer feels. So we spend a lot of time helping advisors coordinate that, where we will be a stopgap for them on the emergency side, or maybe they only need us for a while until their junior advisors get mature enough that they're willing to switch us off of that contingency plan and put their other advisors onto it. There's a lot of different ways you can look at that. And then you fast forward it. Sometimes the emergency plan is the precursor to the actual strategic plan. And again, if you're working with USA Financial, that's a whole nother conversation, but we'll put our money where our mouth is. If you're in alignment, we can help you through a normal strategic transition. But the beauty of this is now we have time on our side, right? So these are two separate conversations. When you're doing a strategic transition, you have time to strategize what that handoff is going to look like. And I would encourage you want to have 12 to 24 months of handoff time, where the existing advisor is giving personal introductions to the acquirer, to the new advisor who's helping transition the previous advisor out, no matter what the circumstances are, whether it's an internal transition, whether it's a non-monetary transition where it's just kind of going from one generation to the next, or it's staying in the family if you have a family running your practice together, or whether you're selling to an outside firm or you're buying an outside firm, you need time to physically go through that transition. If I backtrack one moment just to draw a comparison, if we go back to that emergency contingency for a moment, there, once you have that in place, you need to share that with customers. And the reason it's so important to share it is because it buys you time if and when the emergency happens. So here's how the deal works. If Mike Walters wrecks his car on the way home tonight and something terrible happens, he's no longer here to work with clients. My clientele are their first reaction is going to be, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. We feel so sorry for the family, sending prayers your way, all the support and the love that you would expect. The next thought they have is, oh no, what are we going to do, honey? We need to find a new financial advisor. And they start shopping almost immediately because they don't know how important it is, or they're questioning how important it is to have a seamless transition, and they feel like they need to get going on that immediately. If they know there's a succession plan in place, an emergency contingency plan in place, that'll buy you anywhere from 30 to 90 or even 120 days, because now they know it's part of a plan. He told us this is what would happen if anything ever happened to him, and it will allow the next group in, whoever you're working with, it'll allow them in to make that transition under that emergency, under that duress. It buys time. Otherwise, if you don't have that, your clientele will scatter almost immediately. So these things are all very strategic. You need to think them through. And this is just, we could go on forever, right? But these are just the first two basic steps. An emergency contingency plan, followed by later on some sort of a strategic transition.
And Mike, one of the things that I'm listening to you talk, and as I said, this is one of the things that I think is most valuable to advisors that are affiliated with USA Financial. I wonder, as you over the years were building this out, and even now the conversations you have, how many times, and this is almost rhetorical, but I want you to address this. Do you find yourself leading a discussion or talking to advisors about things that they just have never thought of? That in fact you're doing the thinking, and I think that in a lot of the phases and a lot of things we do at USA, that's really sort of the goal, isn't it? For the relationship we have with our advisors is to think about things that they haven't yet thought about or can't see coming. I'd imagine in the conversations that you have around the whole legacy and succession, that it's constantly, here's an idea you've never thought about. Here's an idea you've never thought about.
Yeah, well, it's nonstop, right? Because what's that old adage? The mechanic always has the worst running car in town, right? So financial advisors, it's not all that different. We spend all this time creating plans for everybody else. And then we've got the number one asset in our life, the business we've created, our financial practice is probably worth more than any other asset we have. And we don't have a plan of protection in place for our family, for our estate, and for the customers. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily that people don't know the concern is there. They've just not addressed it, probably because it's so overwhelming, they don't even know how to begin. And so,
or it was so far out in the future at one point, and all of a sudden, it's as you said, for one reason or another, it's topical. I want to ask you one other question here too. Think of acquisition, and in the earlier segment, everything we talked about to address an acquisition, the tools, the processes, how we move an advisor, the expansion. Think of expansion, efficiencies, scale, junior advisors, staff, whatever it is. What good are those two phases, or what happens to those two phases if you don't follow it with the third?
Right.
Exactly. What happens?
Yep. And so I think what happens is, that asset goes unvalued, and because the value immediately dissolves upon that individual dissolving, if you will. We all know people in the business who they just kind of closed up shop, took down their shingle, And, the business disappeared and dried up and the clients dispersed and there was no value there. And yet that should have been the most valuable thing in that advisor's world, was the value of the business they had created. And so the first step, Steve, that I always say is, you have to, first of all, know how your business gets valued. We all think.
I think that's a really relevant point here.
Yeah. So we all think in terms of P&L statement, right? How much revenue is coming in the door? What are the expenses? What's left over? It's human nature. But this is really a discussion about the net worth statement, the balance sheet. What is the practice worth? And it gets valued differently than does the P&L statement. And so we actually have a tool built that advisors can utilize. It's called the Advisor Blue Book. And it's just what you would think it is. It's a tool so that you can identify the Blue Book value of your practice very quickly and very easily, just like you'd identify the Blue Book value of your automobile. And you can reach out to the team here at USA Financial. Go to usafinancial.com, shoot us a note, send us an email, give us a call, whatever the case might be. And we have this tool that we will help you pump in your numbers, your revenue numbers, and it will identify very accurately, usually within 2 to 3% of a full-blown appraisal, it will identify what the value of your practice is. And the good news is, in our industry, generally speaking, what's good for the customer is also good for the practice. Or maybe better well said, what's best for the customer is most always best for the practice. Meaning that if you're doing the right thing for your customers, you are also creating the most value in the asset of your business. So because you're not publicly traded, you don't have a stock price. You can't go onto the ticker and find out what you're worth today, but you can with the Blue Book value. And so it's a tool to identify, and we actually run it quarterly automatically for advisors affiliated with USA Financial. That's how strongly we feel about it. The business and the flow that goes through USA will calculate automatically quarterly for you. And then if there's anything else above that, we can add to it, or you can add to the tool to get the end value there. So I recommend, minimum once a year, you need to take a hard look at this. I encourage you to look at it quarterly because, again, if the value of your practice is increasing, that fits right into the strategy that you're applying, or vice versa. If I want my practice value to increase, it's all about the growth strategy. And those two things in tandem will not only drive the net worth side of your business, but it will, in fact, drive the P&L side as well.
I'm not sure that this conversation is one of the most fascinating to me. And I think of the immensity of what succession means, and that acquisition and expansion ought to, if we create the value, something valuable has to happen. Right. And it's crazy how many advisors we have known over our history together that just what you said, they just pulled the shingle down and just walked away. And that was it.
Yeah.
And had there been a plan in place, or somebody was doing the thinking or asking the questions or having the conversation, it wouldn't have gone that way.
Exactly. And I'll leave you this final thought. If we spin it the opposite direction, if you've ever thought about growth through acquisition, it's the same conversation. We're just now looking at it through a slightly different lens, because you have to know the value of your firm and what is important to you, what your strengths are, what makes you unique, what your strategic value in the marketplace is. Because if you don't know those things internally about yourself, you're not going to know how to shop for a good acquisition. And then once we find what we think are some good acquisitions, we're going to apply the Blue Book, the Advisor Blue Book, to those potential acquisitions to help weed out the field, to identify where are we in alignment, which acquisitions make the most sense. Done right, the business is always worth more to the buyer than it is the seller. And now we're right back to opportunity gap discussions and value gap discussions, because when you look at another practice and you see the value that it has, but then you might see a glaring weakness, but that glaring weakness is in direct, kind of link to where your strength lies. Sometimes what you'll find is there's even an undervalued asset there that could be greatly valued once you get your hands on it and you can apply your strategy. So again, these conversations can go on and on forever. But again, we try to keep these in digestible bits here at the Rare Advisor. So if you like this stuff, please subscribe, comment, give us a like out there on the video or on the podcast. And we will continue to bring you more in-depth conversation on the strategic growth of your practice, or what we like to call the Rare Advisor, a business model supercharged by recurring and repeatable events. Thanks, Steve. We'll be back again soon.